Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome back to the second episode. Sorry for that little technical glitch there. We're still learning the streaming software, so to give you guys the most aesthetically pleasing experience during the stream, the Lovestream. So today we have a special guest, and I'm going to take a moment to read her bio. She is Rebecca Croman, who is a licensed psychotherapist who is very interested and pro using psychedelics in therapeutic work. And she is the founder of Plant Parenthood, which is actually how we met at a Plant Parenthood event. Rebecca Croman, LCSW, is a licensed therapist, mother of two, and founder of Plant Parenthood, a digital and in-person community of parents who use psychedelics. She is a psychotherapist with a private practice in Brooklyn, where she works with clients to prepare for and integrate after psychedelic experiences. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, Danny. Hi, Vanessa.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you dealing with the COVID quarantining?
I think I'm dealing similarly to other people. So lots of ups, lots of downs. I think it was nice when I kind of gave up on digital school for my kids and trying to get them outside as much as possible. I'm really looking forward to the weather breaking a bit. And I'm very lucky that we could escape the city before things got really bad, and we have some room to spread out. So that is how we're dealing. And how are you guys dealing? It's been tough.
Yeah, it definitely has been. We've been pretty good for the most part. I mean, we've definitely had, where the two of us are together in the apartment, we haven't really left too much over the last couple of days. And I think we're starting to feel a little bit of that, like, I don't know, I'm getting a little stir crazy, and we've been bickering a little bit more recently. So, yeah, we're definitely feeling, I think, the effects of not having space, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we have okay amount of space. I mean, at least we have like separate rooms we can go to.
which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
I find myself playing Fortnite in the bedroom while she's watching TV in the living room, and I'm getting even bored of Fortnite. It's like, I want to do something else.
Yeah. Yes. I was saying, I was talking to a podcast yesterday called the Plant Medicine Podcast, and just saying how everybody's stuff is coming up to the surface right now.
Yep.
And so whatever we've been working on to kind of go down those different neural pathways in our mind, it's all right there for us right now. Because when we're in a high stress situation, that's what happens, is our brain wants to kind of do the easier thing, the thing that we know best. And so things that we maybe thought we addressed, and maybe we thought that they were gone, are right there for us to work on again, which can be frustrating, and it can also be an opportunity.
Yeah, I actually watched a video yesterday. Somebody was talking about shadow work, and how for the most part, we tend to have to dig deep for the shadow work. Like, we have to become detectives and look for it. And we're in a place right now where the shadow work is just bubbling up on its own. And it's the slowdown. You don't really see the shadow that much when you're busy running about and doing as much as possible every day. And this sort of forced slowdown has created, it creates the perfect opportunity for the shadow to start popping up on its own. And those are the things we have to look at right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was kind of referring to, right? Like, we're bickering a little bit more. That's the shadow. We're kind of falling into some of these patterns, or some of these patterns are being exposed now.
Yeah.
That we're spending so much more time together in close quarters. And I mean, luckily we've had a lot of good training. So we're able to mitigate those conflicts pretty quickly before they explode into something greater. But
we're a lot quicker at finding those moments where it's like, wait a minute, this is not really what's upsetting me right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's lucky for you that you've done some foundational work before a time like this. when you can see that stuff for what it is and acknowledge it and try to, become aware of it more quickly, which is the best that we can do, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's a lot of people that I think right now are kind of struggling through that because they maybe haven't had the training that we've had or the plant medicine kind of assistance in it. We would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Planned Parenthood, or tell the audience about what you're doing with the Planned Parenthood community.
I would love to. So Planned Parenthood is a digital and once again will be again in-person community of parents who use psychedelics, plant medicines, and cannabis. And our goal is to destigmatize the topic. And we do that by sharing stories, building community, by introducing other perspectives like Indigenous perspectives, non-Western perspectives, and by offering resources to people. So we, at this moment, are completely digital, of course, which is why I appreciate being on your live stream. So we can get the word out in this way. We're on Instagram. That's our social media platform of choice. And we are launching a couple of things still. So we are working with the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society right now to put together a digital integration group. And that actually is coming up this week. So I will share that information once it's available. And then we are working on some digital content as well. So one of our main goals is to do what you all did on such a massive scale, which is to share stories. When we can see our story reflected somewhere else, it helps us feel more normal about what we're doing. And I think, one of our big goals is to show that parents who use psychedelics are good parents, they're normal, and in a good way. They're dealing with the same things that other parents are dealing with, and they have chosen these particular plants and substances to help them address the things that are going on in their lives.
Yeah, I think that brings up an important point, right? So many people, because of the stigma around psychedelics and plant medicines in general, so many people are in the closet about their use that we probably have a lot of friends. I mean, we don't, because our friends tell us because we're so open about it. But people that do, who don't speak about it, probably have a lot of friends that are using them as well. Obviously, the stigma around cannabis is a lot less now. But even that, I think, is something that, and we can kind of discuss this when we get into talking about children. But one of the things that I've always kind of been a little bit nervous about is how much to share with my son, because, not so much because I'm afraid he can't understand it, but that he doesn't understand the stigma, and he might mention it to his teachers or to someone else out in the world who will then get freaked out, and, God knows how they might respond. So maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of.
No, I think that's
a very good.
Was that a good segue?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I think that that's one of the things that Planned Parenthood is definitely interested in thinking about, interested in talking about. For some people, the stigma means that if they talk about it among a group of friends, they're going to experience social isolation, social kind of like social distancing. Like people saying like, "Oh, I don't want to. It's weird. I don't want my kids to play with those kids." And then for some people who are being, more heavily monitored by law enforcement, it's a much bigger risk for them. I mean, they coming out, so to speak, about their psychedelic use could lead to legal issues. It could lead to loss of custody. So we face different risks depending on what we look like and what our position is in this world. for someone who is, financially stable, for someone whose job is stable, they may feel more comfortable with disclosing that to other people. And for someone whose situation is more delicate, is more fraught, it makes sense that they're not going to want to talk about this in a public way.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a concern that we had when we were asked to go on the Today Show and do the NBC interview. It was a conversation that we had, and it lasted a few days, and we were really concerned. And one of the things that I went back and forth with the producer is this story going to be treated with respect? Is it going to be sensational? Because my risk has to be worth the reward, right? If they're going to just, one of the previous stories they had done, they had blacked out the guy's face, they changed his voice, and they made it like he was a criminal, and they were calling plant medicine street drugs. Yep. And I said to the producer, I was like, crack is a street drug. Meth is a street drug. These are plants. So the fact that you even use that terminology, to me, shows the kind of inherent disrespect towards the topic. So if I'm going to risk, what I would call like a nosy do-gooder, right? Somebody who really believes that psychedelics are dangerous drugs and that we're bad parents for using them, they may, pick up a phone and be a snitch, right? So that's that. It's got to be worth that risk, right? Sure. And we really were pleased with how the Today Show story came out. And we feel that they did treat it with respect, even though they still kind of came at it from a little bit of a mainstream perspective. I feel like they really allowed us to share the spirit of our experiences with it. And I think,
and the fact that they had therapists, I mean, both on the NBC, I mean, you were on the NBC interview, and we had another therapist at the Today Show that were pro the use of psychedelics, was also helpful. We were afraid it was going to be somebody giving like an opposing negative viewpoint. And it seemed to be very, it didn't leave us feeling like they were saying these guys are doing something absolutely terrible and that other people would be like, oh my God, what's happening? Mm-hmm. I think it created an opportunity for a lot more people to share their stories also. Once they saw that, I mean, there were plenty of people who were open and said, yeah, I'm absolutely a better person and a parent after, plant medicines, after using psychedelics. So I think it was, I mean, we were very fortunate that that's the way the story was produced.
Yeah. And I think that the kind of takeaway from this is that for those of you watching, if you're using psychedelics, consider, and I'm not shaming anybody who feels they need to stay in the closet, because there are so many, as Rebecca kind of already pointed out, there are so many different reasons why we might be afraid to come out of the closet. But I would at least ask you to consider coming out of the closet and telling your story. And if you're interested in seeing other people's stories, if you search the hashtag #ThankYouPlantMedicine in February, which the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society took part in, we helped produce an event for that, for people to share their stories. So if you want to see other people's stories, just to get encouragement, or if you decide you want to share your story, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. And I think that the topic as a whole, I approach from what's called a harm reduction perspective. So harm reduction is a modality that basically says, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to give you advice. You can come to us in whatever way you are. So whether you are actively using something or whether you are not using something, it doesn't matter. And our goal in therapy, in the therapeutic container, is to help you make informed, conscious decisions. So it's about accessing information that you may not already have. And it's about, ensuring that you are stepping into your decision, really tuning into your own inherent wisdom about what you're doing. And that's the ultimate goal. So, for someone, for example, who is debating whether to come out of the psychedelic closet, weighing that decision with all of the information that they possibly can is the goal of harm reduction, right? So for you made this decision to step into what you knew could be a potentially harmful situation, but you weighed that out with the potential gains and with sharing your story, and that was a super conscientious decision. I hope you don't mind if I just rewind to one thing that you said, because I think it's sort of worth mentioning that, when you mentioned that the producer of the NBC segment had also done another segment where people's faces were shaded out and shadowed, we don't want, we don't want substance use to be treated like that, because stigma creates shame. Shame creates a lot of harmful feelings and harmful behaviors. So, and that applies to any substance, I think. It applies to someone using crack cocaine. It applies to someone using, I forgot the other drug that you mentioned, but this is a topic that Dr. Carl Hart brought up at his Horizons presentation, was this hierarchy of drugs. So at the Horizons conference on psychedelics, most people in the room feel that psychedelics are at the top of that hierarchy. But he challenged that notion, which I appreciated, and just asked us to kind of think about that a little bit more. Crack cocaine is crack is cocaine, right? And we know about these disparities in sentencing. We know about how harmful that can be to communities. And, he pointed out that MDMA is a it's the same chemical compound as other substances that are really looked down upon. So to have a hierarchy of drugs saying like this one is the best and this one is not acceptable, it's just something for us to look at and kind of challenge those paradigms as well. So just thought I would throw that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right and I apologize for that judgment, because that was definitely a judgment statement I made. I think that a lot of those judgments are inherent and have led to exactly like you're saying. We don't judge a Wall Street trader for snorting coke, but we judge somebody on the street who's using crack. Sure. Or maybe we don't judge them as harshly. Well, certainly the justice system doesn't judge them as harshly.
Absolutely.
And even from a perspective of, looking at addiction, I love what Dr. Gabor Mate says. When he talks about addiction, he says, really, this is just people looking for ways to medicate their pain. Absolutely. And some people choose pharmaceutical drugs, some people choose plant-based medicines, and some people choose what we would judge as street drugs, right?
Sure.
But it all comes from the same place of pain. And if we can be compassionate towards that pain, then we can be compassionate against anyone.
Absolutely.
Or towards anyone. I mean.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing goes for the way we look. We look at it as, oh, this is drugs, it's a coping mechanism, but we have so many other coping mechanisms, whether it's binge watching TV, whether it's drinking alcohol, sugar, the way, the things that we eat, even extreme exercise, like it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be a drug. It all stems from the same root problem. And I wanted to touch on something that you said in the NBC interview, where you were talking about the way we treat illnesses now. We treat the symptom instead of the root cause. And I was hoping you could expand a little bit on that.
Sure. Yeah. So what we are used to in a Western medical system is that we have a symptom and we treat that symptom. So the thing that I mentioned in the NBC interview was a headache, right? So we have a headache, we are in pain, so we treat the pain of the headache. Now, let's assume that that is a chronic condition, right? That we are experiencing headaches all the time. Well, really, that could be a symptom of trauma. And so what psychedelics allow us to do is to stay with the pain, really, to really explore that in a much more thorough way, and to try and understand more about where it's coming from. Because when we keep treating the symptom, treat the symptom, treat the symptom, it's circuitous. It doesn't allow us to get to the root causes of what's going on and address those things more thoroughly. Now, another thing about psychedelics that we are very unaccustomed to is that the substance use itself is not the end of the experience. What happens after that is absolutely critical and can mean the difference between having lasting change in your life and not. Which, when people use psychedelics therapeutically, they're often seeking that lasting change in their lives. Often, not always. So one of the things that we need to come to grips with a little bit more is how we work with the experience afterwards. And that process is called integration. So, it's very easy for us to use psychedelics and then go back to whatever world we were living in and not make any behavioral changes that would create the circumstances for us to have lasting benefit from the substance. Integration is a process of doing the work, so to speak. So it can be done in any number of ways. It's about tapping into the thing that works for you, that works for your lifestyle. So a couple examples that are more popular, I would say, or more well-known are yoga, meditation, journaling, spending time in nature. But there's an innumerable number of ways to do this process of integration. And one of the things that Plant Parenthood is interested in is, how do we do this when our kids are around? It's one thing to be a person without children and go, sort of do a ceremony or do an experience with someone and then come back and have lots of, free time and solo time to process that experience. But when we have kids, we come back, to our job of parenting, usually right away. So not always, but often right away. And so that's something that I'm exploring with Planned Parenthood. And it's something that I think a lot of people are exploring right now during this period of quarantine is, how can I've seen a lot of social media stuff about people really getting their kids into nature. That's all that we have right now. We don't have museums. We don't have movies. We don't have play spaces. We don't have birthday parties. So what are we doing? I know, I guess maybe this is just my feed, but what I notice is people taking their kids into nature. And that's really, it's incredible, that we're tapping in that way, and that this moment is allowing some people, not everybody, to do that. One thing that I was doing when I was in Brooklyn is going into Prospect Park, and I was going off the beaten path into the trails in the interior of the park where there's hardly anybody there. But it was just this beautiful process of letting my kids lead the way, letting them, lead me through whatever winding trails they wanted to. And we brought nothing. We had water and snacks, and that was it. There was no toys, there was no screens, there was nothing. And there was nothing to fight over. There was nothing to, there were things to get upset about. My kids are young. They get upset about lots of things. But it was, they're playing with dirt. They're playing with moss. There's plenty of it, right? They were fighting over a stick. It was okay, but there's lots and lots of sticks. There's such an abundance when it gets to nature. And then I think that there was just a lot of quiet time. And that's really what we're looking for with integration, is we're looking for space. We're looking for contemplation. We're looking for practices that allow us to slow down.
Yeah, I guess right now we're kind of all in a forced integration period where, like you said, there's nothing to entertain. We realize, or we can recognize at this point, how often we run to find things to entertain our kids with. Like, what are we going to do now that everything's closed down and people are freaking out? Like, how do I entertain this child? And I think that, I mean, even for us, we found that we're creating more time to be together as a family. Like, even if it's just playing Uno cards, or, something as simple as painting or art or Legos.
Mm-hmm.
The other day we sat and played with Legos for like 2 hours, and it's just this quiet time, this relaxing time, and whatever pops into our head, we talk about. And I think that for me, I see that as a sort of blessing in disguise, right? We're in this place where different things are coming up, and we've been able to have conversations about parenting because of that also, because we're in this space where we're not like constantly occupied with a billion other things. We could easily say, oh, let's just go to the movies, and boom, you killed 2.5 hours of time watching a movie. And so now that we can't just plant Xander in front of the TV for hours, we're trying to find things where we engage with him.
We don't do that anyway.
No, we
never
don't.
do that. But it would be easy, right? In this kind of atmosphere, it would be easy to just say, go put on Netflix, and there are moments that I do. He doesn't really watch TV, but he loves to watch YouTubers playing video games. And I don't know how he can spend hours, but if we let him, he could spend hours watching somebody else play video games. Doesn't make sense to me, but
I didn't get that either.
But it would be very easy to just say, you know what, just go ahead, do whatever you want, and I think a lot of people for a while, just based on kind of looking at social media, I think a lot of people for a while felt like this was like a little bit of a vacation. And it's like, okay, we're on vacation, so go ahead. You can have, even though we don't normally let you spend, 5 hours on your phone or 5 hours watching TV, go ahead and go do it because it's vacation time. And I think now that it's, it's like a month almost now that we're on a full quarantine, I think people are hopefully backing away from that and realizing that's not sustainable. And that will really cause more anxiety. Being in front of the technology constantly, without being too woo-woo, the electronic, just the electromagnetic waves, and that's something that when you're in nature you don't have. And I've found, for me personally, that I tend to be very sensitive to it. So, like, for instance, when we go to Mexico, our parents are from a really small town, and it's like literally you can feel that hum of the electric grid is gone, as opposed to being in New York City where there's Wi-Fi and electronics all around us. We're surrounded by the electrical grid, and it's almost like this baseline hum that's just always there that we're not even conscious of anymore. But when you're out in nature and that buzz is gone, it's like, oh, it feels so much more peaceful here, right? Right. I think that's a huge part of that. So now we're stuck in the apartment and we're surrounded by not just our TVs and our computers, but everybody around us and the cell phone tower that's on the roof and the electric lines. And so we're a little bit trapped with that. But yeah, we've been trying to get to Prospect Park when we can.
And I think it's good that a lot of people are turning towards nature for that. And obviously that's, like you said, it's not a possibility for everyone. And I'm sure there are people that are like, yes, go watch TV for 5 hours and leave me alone. And I think that's okay too, because we're in a space where we're learning how to navigate this situation. It's not something that anybody expected or planned. I feel parents certainly didn't really plan for this situation. So it's understandable that some may turn to that. But yeah, it's beautiful to see that more people are kind of going out in nature walks. I mean, our neighborhood is very, it's lined with like a bunch of trees. So sometimes when we go out for grocery shopping, we see parents walking out on the street with their kids, and it's like they're enjoying just, I mean, it may not be full-blown nature, but they are enjoying, the trees, the flowers. It's spring. We can sort of start to identify the new flowers popping up. And so I think that's, it is a beautiful thing to see that we're moving in that direction. And maybe that's part of the lessons that we're learning as a society.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as you said, like nature doesn't necessarily have to be a massive park. Like nature could also be the plant in your home if that's what you have access to. It's interesting that what we're talking about here with technology as well, because it sort of makes me think about one of the things that that I've been thinking about recently. So one of the things that we try to access through using psychedelics is a sense of entropy. Entropy is disorganization in the brain. When we're in our sort of normal lives without using substances, we have too little entropy. We go down the same neural pathways in our brain. We are really entrenched in our habits. It's very, very hard to break out of those behavioral patterns. So right now, every single person is in a brand new pattern. Their lives look completely different. Their environment looks completely different. So why do we try to have that entropy? Because entropy creates this condition to begin going down new neural pathways in the brain. And so it can create the conditions for lasting behavioral change. Now, I could also go off in another direction about how this is also why psychedelics are not for everybody, because there are people who you don't want to create too much entropy in the brain. Thanks for throwing up my website. But I'll leave that for another thought. So in this moment, when like Vanessa, like you're describing, watching parents walking down the street and you don't have so much to distract you. Distraction through technology sends us down the same neural pathways as any other addictive substance. And that's by design. We know that. Mm-hmm. That tech companies attempt to do that to get us sucked into their platform. So when we're in nature in whatever form that takes and we're slowing down, we can notice things as if they are brand new. And that's this beautiful moment that we're in right now. It's a very, very, very difficult moment. But there's also some beauty in being able to slow down and being able to say, like, look at this blossom on this tree. Feel how this dirt in the tree pit or in the potted plant or in the park, feel the texture of it. Those are the things that we attempt to do with integration. Those are the things that are easier for us to access when we use psychedelics, because they allow us to slow down and be in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I mean, I was making a joke the other day that this whole month has been like just one big collective ayahuasca ceremony, because we are being forced to slow down. The shadow is kind of coming up. We're facing all of these things. I mean, we've had conversations about parenting, about our relationship. All of this stuff has just kind of come up. And like you said earlier, there's levels to it. There are things that you think, oh, I already resolved this issue. I'm already over this. And then it pops right back up again. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought I had already worked this out. But there are so many levels to it. And right now we are being pushed out of our daily patterns. And that, forces us to take a closer look at our coping mechanisms, for sure. So I think that's an excellent point.
I just thought of a question that I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. In your experience as a therapist, do you find that your clients, obviously you can't divulge any specific information, but just in general, do you find that there's an issue with people becoming dependent on psychedelics rather than doing the emotional and psychological work, but where they just kind of rely on those substances without delving into the work?
Yes. And that's one of the things that is such a shift that people have to make. And it's something that you brought up earlier when you were discussing how mainstream media typically treats this topic. I think I'm so with you that I think the Today Show did a beautiful job of, and the NBC show did a beautiful job of showing your experience, showing you guys as, take this in the best way, like normal, cool, good parents that a lot of people can relate to. And what we can't show as much because of the format of mainstream media is the nuance of it. And this is sort of what I was talking about before. There are many people who are not accustomed to having to put in the work. And so what ends up happening is that they lean on the substance to give them the entirety of the experience. And then I think a lot of people come up pretty disappointed because they're not seeing the change that they would like to see in their lives. And I think people have to find the right thing for them. There are many, many people who simply are working too hard not too hard. That's not the way I want to say it. They're working very hard because they have to, because there's no opportunity for them to stop working and, go to a meditation retreat for 10 days. Like, that's just not going to happen for them. So finding the thing that works for you in your life is incredibly important. And that might mean that you fold in some of these contemplative practices into the things that you're already doing. So let me give you an example. Now, let's say that, time is lacking and you're just not finding those 20 minutes in your day to do a meditation practice. Okay. Well, all of us eat during the day. We have to. So something that I speak to my clients about is, can you make that experience a full 5 sense experience? Can you slow down enough, remove your phone from your eyes, right? So that it's not like begging you to look at it. And then can you experience your food with 5 senses? Can you smell it? Can you look at what it looks like? Can you even, like bring it to your ear and tap on it? That's a technique from the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that John Kabat-Zinn pioneered. Smell and taste, and how much can you slow down that process? Even if it's only 5 minutes that you are sitting without distraction, experiencing your food, chewing your food, tasting your food, that in itself, for many of us, is like mind-boggling. Like, whoa, I never did that, or I barely ever do that. So, anything, if that's what you can put in, if that's the work that you can put in, then that's the work you can put in. Some of us are privileged enough that we can take more time for those experiences, and we can go take that yoga class. We can go, to that writing retreat. We can go to a silent meditation retreat, things like that. But it doesn't have to be those things, but it's got to be something. Or I think people typically are disappointed with the results. And I've certainly worked with people who I see that they're not putting in the work, and they're still unhappy with the way that their lives are looking.
I think that was a really good example, because, I'm absolutely guilty of that. This morning I had a bowl of cereal laying in bed with my phone, and I'm just shoveling the cereal into my mouth and scrolling through all the horrific news that's on Facebook. Yeah. While you were saying that, I was imagining, what if I would have tasted those cinnamon squares instead of actually just swallowing them without tasting them?
Yeah. I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh has a lot of also like mindfulness ideas, like even washing dishes. Like I've kind of taken that as like my meditation time in certain moments. If I'm upset about something, I'm like, okay, I'm going to wash these dishes, and I'm thankful for these dishes. I'm thankful for the food we had. I try to bring that in small moments. I mean, if I'm going to the grocery store that's a few blocks away, I try to pay attention to the trees. You know, like there are little moments that sometimes we don't realize that we have during the day to experience mindfulness, to bring yourself kind of back in. And that is part of the work. I think as with anything, I mean, you can go to therapy, and if you just sit there and expect that in that hour, the therapist is going to figure out your problems for you, you're going to be disappointed.
Or if you think that a mushroom trip is going to figure out your problems for you. I mean, it's like I said on the Today Show, it's kind of like it greases the wheels a little bit, right? Like it helps turn down the volume on your ego so that you can then listen without that judgmental voice, but you still have to do the listening. You can't just ride out the trip and expect, okay, now I'm healed of XYZ trauma.
Right. And I think that's a really, really important point, that mainstream media is often not able to capture that nuance because of the format.
Yeah.
So I think these longer format kind of in-depth things like you all are doing is really critical to helping people understand what this process is about. It's so different. It's so different than what we're used to.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I was kind of like after seeing the interview saying, oh my God, these people must think like we just have a trip and then it's like, boom, everything's fine. I mean, Danny said during the NBC interview, you know, like they shot like an hour and a half and they reduced it to like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But during that interview, he said like, we're in couples therapy every day. I mean, every day of our lives is couples therapy for us. Every day, every argument that we have is like, okay, what issue are we tackling now? Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's gotten to a point where I think we feel, at least I feel at times, grateful for the arguments, because it's like, all right, we're digging into something new now. We're going to clear something else out, and whatever we clear just makes way for something better to come along anyway. And I mean, as we've been having some of our struggles this week, like I'm able to see like, wait a minute, this is really just triggering this old wound that I thought I had healed, and it really isn't healed yet. And I'm seeing this, I see how I'm reacting to this situation because of that situation. And it's like, holy cow, there's so much more work I still have to do. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think one of the things that we have as a society is we have kind of come to accept that things happen instantaneously, this instant gratification idea. And so, I mean, it's all work. Our entire relationship is going to be work. I mean, that's part of the experience of just being a human being, right? You're learning every single day. And I think we were kind of disappointed that didn't get put into the interview or even the Today Show. It was more about the legality of the situation as opposed to what are you doing every day now? How does this change your life? And it's, yeah, every day we're able to recognize our patterns more and more. And as we recognize them, we're clearing them, because just awareness of it is helping you reduce your reaction at that point and instead find a new path.
Mm-hmm. And just I want to point out that while I'm not maybe in the place where I am like thankful for the arguments, I can absolutely see how we recover from them so much more quickly. Mm-hmm. Instead of giving each other the silent treatment for a day or a few hours, it's like 10 minutes later, we'll come to each other and we'll share those things that we figured out. Like, oh, so I realized when you said that thing to me and I felt hurt, it was because it was really reminding me that my mom used to say this thing to me when I was a kid. And so I wasn't really upset with you. And then we can unravel it and work it out. And that's the couples therapy that we're doing on a daily basis. So, and that requires being vulnerable with each other. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we've really learned very intensely. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I personally have learned through the use of psychedelics was being confident enough to be able to be vulnerable with her. Like, whereas before maybe I felt more insecure, I didn't love myself, I judged myself, and psychedelics kind of helped teach me to judge myself less, love myself more, understand that the things that I do that I don't like, the things I don't like about myself are defense mechanisms that my ego has created to deal with the traumas of life, to deal with PTSD. I can forgive myself for those things, stop judging myself, love myself. Then that causes me to feel confident. Now I can take that confidence and say, I can be vulnerable with you and say exactly what I feel or what I'm thinking, because I'm not so insecure that I'm worried about, like, if I share this with you, you're going to decide you don't love me anymore. That's like, whew,
that's beautiful.
magical thing.
That was a beautiful way of describing it. And I think that this is such an amazing example of integration. You have these experiences, but what they teach you is what to look for in your everyday life. How to reframe, Vanessa, what you're talking about, the clinical term for it is reframing. It's the same argument, right? But now you see it as an opportunity. And Danny, you don't see it as much as the opportunity, but you see your stuff coming up. And then this added layer of compassion for yourself that you got because of the psychedelic experience. That's the thing that you're reaching for. It sounds like a very conscious process to reach for that self-compassion. And also having had the experience of letting your ego quiet down, it shows you, again, what is it that you're reaching for in your everyday existence so that you can infuse the teachings of the psychedelic experience into your life. Otherwise, it's just a beautiful experience that you had and you have a nice memory of it, or a challenging experience, whatever it was for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, live stream, whatever we want to call it, mostly to share to be vulnerable about it. I think we live in a society where everything we put on social media is the nice parts of our relationship, the good times that we have. And I mean, we went on TV and shared our story, and it sounds like we've healed from so much. But I think by being vulnerable, by sharing the difficulties, that even after all of those experiences, we still have arguments, we still have disagreements. And that's so important for other people to hear. There's this stigma, just like there's a stigma about using psychedelics, there's a stigma about having difficult relationships. We all have difficult relationships. My parents have been married almost 50 years. They're going to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary in November. And I see them as like the perfect couple, and they have arguments all the time. Right. And when I was younger, they were very careful not to let us see that. It was like, no, we'll argue in private where our kids don't see. But as we've gotten older, they kind of tell us their process. And I think it's beautiful to see that they're still working through things at this age. They're both almost 70 years old, and they're still processing childhood traumas. We recently did an interview with my parents. We decided to interview them and ask them about their lives and their story and how they met, and just to kind of have it recorded somewhere. Mm-hmm. And as we were kind of just talking about their childhood, certain things came up. Like my mom kind of had a memory of being insecure because my grandmother was very I guess demanding, and not in a bad way, but just like, you can always do better. And so my mom has a habit of saying that to me, and that used to cause insecurity in me, where I was like, it's never enough for my mom. She always wants me to do just a little bit better than that. And kind of hearing my mom tell that story about her mom, I was like, oh my God, this is a generational thing. This isn't just her mom saying this to me. She learned that from her mom. And it's, we had the conversation, she said it to me, and as she was saying it, I think she caught it herself too, where it was like, oh, I do this too.
Yes. I love what you're talking about right now. This is one of the themes that I would like to explore through Planned Parenthood. It's that our stuff doesn't just belong to us. It belongs to the people that came before us. Yeah. And whether you're a parent or you're not a parent, it's relevant, right? Because you're a human, and you were raised by people who were raised by people. Mm-hmm. And so this has a term. It's called epigenetics, or generational trauma, whatever you want to call it. So it's the expression of a certain, epigenetics is the expression of a certain genetic trait because of the experience that it's passed down to you because of experience. So for example, if you had a certain genetic trait and you were predisposed to it, you may or may not express that genetic trait depending on your conditions. So, and with generational trauma, we know about this through many different things, but one of the ways we know about it is through slavery. So each generation adopts patterns that were coping mechanisms for their parents in whatever situation they were in. And so it becomes like, it's like you're dealing with your own stuff, but you're also dealing with the circumstances of whomever it was that raised you. Psychedelics can be particularly useful in being able to take a look at that with compassion, or maybe not always compassion, being able to look at it, being able to understand, what was passed down to you and having some insight about that. And, everyone kind of adapts these behavioral patterns for a reason. So maybe sometimes this can manifest as having compassion for someone who was not so good to you, right? Yeah. Like a parent or caregiver who was not so good to you. And that in itself can be a really healing thing. So Planned Parenthood, I think, is a way to explore the stuff that we kind of like do to our children, or the ways that we are with our children, but also the ways that our parents were with us. It's both.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, through that conversation with my mom, I feel like I learned so much. It was like just we had a couple of days, we interviewed them 2 days in a row, right? And we kind of had even conversations after that. And I was like, there's so much stuff here that kind of tells me a lot more about myself too. And, having the conversation with my mom and with both of my parents, I mean, we even discovered that they had a similar situation. Danny and I dated when, many years ago, and we kind of broke up. I broke up with him. I just ghosted on him. And as my parents were telling the story of their relationship, my dad was like, your mom just broke up with me and didn't even tell me why. And I was like, oh my God, I did the same thing.
Right. So maybe that's like an expression of like someone's need to flee, right? We have fight, flight, or flee. I'm sorry, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So for you, that was your, I don't know what it was for you, but perhaps that's your expression of flight, right? And your mom's expression of flight, which was useful to her or somebody that came before her. A lot of people, we live in Brooklyn. Well, Brooklyn is the home of this whole diaspora of people who are immigrants. And what we forget is that the immigrant story is often a really traumatic one. My namesake, my great-grandmother, Rebecca, came over in the turn of the century, and we had this whole family story about how she was like kooky, and she got married to this man and then divorced him, and then got married to another man, divorced him, and then got married to the first man again, and then divorced him. But really what I came to understand through, investigating her story a little bit more is she's traumatized. She came to the United States when she was 16 years old with $20, which was a lot at that time. She worked in really poor conditions, and she was by herself. She didn't speak the language. That is a traumatizing experience. So I don't quite.
Which is also her mother's story.
Yeah.
Yes. So many people's stories, right, of hardship and how they cope with that hardship. And so understanding, what is it that I am, what is it that I'm kind of hardwired to express because of the experience that the people before me, had. And then how do I look at that with a little bit of compassion, and look at myself with a little bit of compassion and attempt to change it?
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't pay attention enough to those things that aren't really ours. Sometimes it's a struggle, right? You're like, why do I react this way? I didn't have this trauma. I didn't experience this, and even that was something that my mom has been struggling with also, because she's like, well, why are you guys so insecure? Like, why are my children so insecure? She's like, you guys have everything, but it's all generational. Like you said, I mean, if she came to this country when she was 15 years old, didn't speak the language, had never even been out into a city, much less traveled out of the country, this was shocking for her and scary, and she couldn't get in touch with her parents. She could only speak to them like once a week, and it was, it's a really traumatizing experience, and it created a lot of insecurities in her as well. And so then I come in with my insecurities, and my mom's like, you speak the language, you are protected by your parents, what are you so afraid of? And even for me, at times, there comes a point where I judge myself. Well, what am I so insecure about? What is it that I'm afraid of? Kind of understanding now the generational trauma, I can see where those insecurities have just automatically been passed down. And I can have more compassion for those insecurities, just like I can have compassion for my mom's overprotectiveness, or, the ideas that she has. Well, you don't have anything to be afraid of because you didn't have my experience. She just doesn't see how that experience carried through, just, as just part of life. That's the way we experience things. And, I would say unfortunately, but I don't think it's unfortunate. I think it gives us the opportunity. If my mom couldn't heal that, or if my grandmother couldn't heal that, it gives me the opportunity to heal that. And as we heal ourselves, we start healing the people before us. We heal the people after us. We have that power.
Yeah. I was going to say that that's one of the things that caused a lot of our initial conflicts in our relationship, was because, obviously for me, I grew up being told, as an American born here and, growing up in New York City, I was told you can do anything you set your mind to do. So her insecurities don't make sense to me. I'm like, what? You can do anything you want to do. I couldn't see any of the things that affected her. The fact that she came from an immigrant family, the fact that her skin is darker than mine, and how people in the world relate to her differently than they would relate to me, in both positive or negative ways, right? Our experiences are very different. And in the beginning of our relationship, that caused a lot of conflict because I couldn't see that. I just felt like my perspective is correct, yours is incorrect. All you have to do is think like me and you'll be fine.
I can't imagine why that would have caused a fight.
Which is why learning empathy, the plants really teaching me empathy has been so life-changing for me personally and transformative for our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
We are running out of time. We only have about a few minutes left. We can go over if you're good to hang around. I did want to ask you about, I wanted to kind of talk about, in the pre-interview, we had talked a little bit about shamanic cultures using these medicines for thousands of years. And now the medical establishment is kind of coming in and appropriating a lot of these therapies, and they're really not getting respect or even credit for it. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit to that before we go.
Yeah, sure. Well, what we know is that plant medicines have been around for at least 7,000 years. So what we are applying now is an MRI machine. We're applying Western scientific principles to a very ancient practice of treating mental health conditions. Indigenous culture wouldn't call it mental health conditions. In fact, not all indigenous cultures recognize it as a symptom of an individual. They may recognize it as a symptom of the community. I mean, how radical would that be if we started thinking that way, right? So what we, I think, are not doing in the psychedelic community, although I've seen some glimmers of it starting to happen, is we're not acknowledging this is not new. This is really, really old. And so, what's new, our application of these evidence-based protocols is useful and it's helpful, But what we're doing is we are moving things towards a medicalized model for how these treatments will be applied in the future. And that's useful and that's helpful. And it also is going to exclude a lot of people because it's going to be expensive.
Yes.
We don't know how insurance is going to treat this, but we do know that as far as the study protocol, 2 therapists in a room with someone who ingests a substance that does not cost a lot of money to make and may only have to be administered once. That is a difficult kind of economic model for people to make money off of. So imagine, and these therapists are in the room for like 8 hours plus with someone. So it's 2 therapists' time. It's, the time for this, that the space is going to be used for, and it's, a synthesized version of whatever plant medicine, because in a medical version, you're not going to get like a mushroom cap. You're going to get a pill that is a synthesized version of this material. So I think something that we need to be thinking about is how indigenous cultures have used this with much success for so long, and how we can think a bit outside of the medical model, including just the stigma of it, because that's something that Planned Parenthood is interested in looking at. Is if we look at how indigenous cultures treat parents and plant medicines, there's no attempt to exclude children from ceremony. It would be like not taking your kids to church. Like, it's, of course you want them in the ceremony. You're bearing witness to a healing experience. And there are many children, in fact, who ingest varying amounts of the substance depending on their age. Now, we might look at that and be like, oh my God, they're giving their kids drugs, right? But these are cultures who have way more experience than we do. And we need to think about how we learn from them and how we, delicately approach this topic of appropriation. It's tricky, right? Because I guess you could sort of say like, well, the whole thing is appropriation, right? Like, you are taking a plant medicine and using it to treat a mental health condition. They've been doing that for thousands of years. So aren't you appropriating? Well, hopefully we can have sort of a broader view on it, because we are going to need, I think that we are going to need both a medical model for, the utilizing these substances, and we will also need to be taking, to be utilizing some kind of non-medical model to do this work, because it's simply too cost prohibitive for everyone to be able to do this in a medical setting. So I would think one thing that I will say is that I was encouraged at Horizons this year to hear a couple white researchers who were on the stage kind of like give a nod to where this all came from. And of course, there was a Native American leader who spoke at Horizons, Stephen Benally. He's a director of the Peyote Conservation Initiative. And so I think that's something we need to see more of, and we need to see more voices, Indigenous voices elevated in this space. And we need to really be kind of honoring the wisdom that they've had for so long and figuring out, like, is there a way that they're okay with us sharing in that knowledge?
Yeah, I think we definitely come from that perspective. We have kind of, and Vanessa has been very interested in delving deeper into her Indigenous roots. But whenever we have used psychedelics, it has always been in a kind of after a shamanic practice, after an Indigenous, practice. And I think to say that, are we appropriating? I think it's appropriation when it's taken disrespectfully and used for profit, or, if you're not using it for what it was intended. It's medicine. We were all Indigenous at some period, no matter how far we've become removed from our Indigenous roots. we were all indigenous at some point. So to say that plant medicine is only for people who have maintained their indigenous culture, I don't think is accurate to we all have the right morally to use plant medicine. But I think are we respecting the medicines, or are we trying to exploit them?
Yes.
I think that's where the issue of social justice and appropriation is definitely legitimate.
And also how our use of these plants affects the cultures, right? If certain plants are being used in certain cultures and we start consuming them in greater quantities, does this affect those cultures? Does this affect their access to the plants that they've worked with for so many years? So I think all of that has to be taken into consideration as well.
I mean, obviously we shouldn't be taking from someone else so that we can have it, but if we're talking about expanding consciousness, expanding awareness of it, expanding and sharing the wisdom of it, I think that's perfectly fine.
And I agree with what you said. I mean, the idea of bringing them into the conversation. I mean, we're exploring them separate from them, and we're missing out on, like you said, what we're missing out on truly is the integration, because these cultures know the integration. These cultures have worked with the medicine for ages, and so they're all about the integration. And our society, as we were saying before, works from a very
magic pill treating the symptoms.
Magic pill, boom, I'm good. But we're not following the protocol that these cultures are following when they ingest these medicines. And like you said, they're introducing their kids to the medicine for their kids to know the respect they have towards it. I mean, when we were in Peru, our shaman was explaining that her kids from age 7 were already learning to ingest the medicines. And so they grow up with that knowledge. It's done in a very specific setting under supervision, and the community as a whole. We've separated ourselves from community. And I think what you're doing with the Plant Parenthood creates this greater sense of community where people are coming together, sharing their experiences. And that's important. That's part of the integration work as well. I think that it allows us to help each other out as a community, to lift each other through these, through these experiences.
Yeah. I think that, like, that kind of what you were saying conjured up the image of people sitting around a campfire and smoking the peace pipe, right? But that's what they're doing. They're like the same way we're having conversations after we do psychedelics about whatever traumas came up. That's the integration process. And I think the medical kind of mainstream looks at it as very folksy and, it's a little bit condescending, but these rituals were designed with these emotional and psychological kind of integration methods designed into them. So it's seen as religious, and then it's kind of dismissed. Oh, this is some ancient religion. They think they have to pray to the sun to make it come up the next day, kind of, But if you study the rituals themselves, especially from a therapist point of view, or even a psychologist or a psychiatrist point of view, you can see that these mechanisms, integration mechanisms that are being used in modern therapy are present in the rituals.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been really
Thank you so much. This was so fun to talk with you guys, and so nice to see your faces.
Thank you.
We had just met before everything kind of shut down, and I'm really looking forward to some more in-person gatherings and seeing you all in person. And
yeah, we can't wait till you get this integration group off the ground. We're going to be there.
Yes, amazing. Yes. Well, that announcement will be on my Instagram. My Instagram you can access through the website, which you have graciously put up.
Yeah, let me throw that back up.
My handle is a little complicated. It's Plant Parenthood, because I couldn't get the parent that was not available. But you can find it through the website. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun to talk.
Thank you for joining us. It was a great conversation. We really appreciate it. And take care. Enjoy your time in nature.
Thank you. You too. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. And we really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys found some value in the discussion.
And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll before you go, just if you could follow us, we really appreciate it on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and there's some there's privacy concerns with some of the major social media networks. So if you're interested in privacy, and also censorship is a big issue, we're also on minds.com and Float. These are two social media networks that are anti-censorship, and so there are great places to be kind of like an alternative to Facebook. If you are worried about, Facebook and the big social media companies now are openly admitting that they're going to be censoring certain content and removing it. In particular, if you have a more holistic view of medicine, they've already for the past year been marking a lot of holistic medicine as fake news. But now they're outright saying that they're planning to completely remove anything that is considered more holistic. Certainly anything that's considered anti-vaccine or vaccine choice gets grouped into that. So we definitely encourage you to get on minds.com or Float. There are certainly others as well, but those are the two that we are on. We would love for you to follow us and share our content with your friends. We really would appreciate that as well. So thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.